Hi, I'm Rob Cosman. Welcome to my shop. If you are going to build fine furniture, you are going to make mistakes. Slice of humble pie. I'm going to go through and share with you several of my top boo-boos. Hopefully you'll learn from them. Let's go. Once in a while, a mistake actually turns out to be beneficial. This is my second major bench. The first one I built, which is way back in 1989, was a big maple bench with bloodwood accents. And when you're gluing up this core, each one of these pieces has a double spline on the top, spline on the bottom, and you've got to face join them all together. What I didn't realize is there was nowhere for the excess glue to go, so I had tons of clamps on there, and very stressful. You got glue drying and you're trying to get this thing together. Anyway, remember, this is my first bench. When it all came out of the clamps, there was a crack right along here, all the way down. I was devastated. And I got thinking, I said, well, I'd already used, I think the back piece was bloodwood, and I'd had some bloodwood accents, the dowels that were used to help reinforce the dovetails. So I thought, okay. So I took my router, I think a 1/4 inch bit, and I ran a groove right along the crack over the entire length. Set in a piece of bloodwood, looked like a racing stripe, flushed it all off. Well, where it became so advantageous was when you put a piece in the vise, it's always nice to make sure that it's level. All I have to do is just eyeball along the edge of the board with that racing stripe, and that gets me really close, certainly close enough for what I'm doing. So much so that when I built this bench, I purposely put in that same racing stripe for that reason. So every once in a while, the screw up actually comes out to be in your favor. So this mistake was a little more serious. I remember when I did it. This is a standing desk, and what I wanted was to have everything so that it just flowed beautifully. So the drawer fronts, you can't really see them until the drawer gets opened on all three. You don't have to lock them if they can't find them. I did the same thing down here. The oxidation has, for some reason, gone a little bit wonky, but that was all one piece of wood. I cut a strip off the bottom, a strip off the top, took the center section out, and then cut the drawer front. Was very careful to join to make sure when everything went back together, it was as tight as possible. In fact, I built the whole drawer section with all the grain and all the pieces running the same way, so I wouldn't have to allow for any seasonal movement. Well, came to the second drawer and ended up, when I put the drawer together, it didn't perfectly line up, meaning I put together 3 corners. The 4th corner over here, I had to move the piece. As soon as you have to move the piece sideways, you've lost that perfect fit. I had to start over. Well, how am I going to start over with that drawer front already attached? So what I did, and I had very little room because there was no space. I couldn't take any off the ends or the top and bottom and get the fit I needed. I ended up slicing off the 1/8 of an inch off of the original drawer and building another drawer with a through dovetail, and carefully clamping that back on, this piece on, with clamps side to side, and top to bottom, so that it didn't move at all. And fortunately, when it went all back together, I still had my fit. That one was a save. Why that has oxidized to be different is beyond me, because this is all the same piece of wood. Yeah, well, sometimes wood is wood. Oh, this is embarrassing. I built this chest of drawers made out of cherry. When I did my drawer front, I found a piece of nicely figured cherry, and I was able to take it and slice it 5 slices so that I could put each piece on the drawer front so that the grain flowed beautifully top to bottom. So what I did is I made a through dovetail, took that 1/8 inch piece and glued it on. Now, I had to keep everything in order, so everything was marked out. Well, when we are doing this and we're filming it, like I said, there's oftentimes big gaps between when we get to film. Well, it's oxidized such now that you don't really notice it, but this one, I accidentally got it turned around. So this should be over here. Well, I've never solved that problem. I didn't want to cut it off and start over. I just have to live with it. But that's just an example of a mistake made. Nobody sees it until I point it out, but then they go, oh yeah. And I'll just learn to keep my mouth shut. So back to the standing desk. Tried to do some clever stuff with this. So when you open up your drawer, if you close the little trap door underneath and your customer needs their pen or pencil, when you close this, it pops out and gives them their pens and their pencils. Well, when I made this, it was already finished. I was working on this drawer and I can't remember exactly what happened, but for some reason, I made that piece the wrong size. That had been cut out of this piece, this solid piece of cherry. Now, what was I going to do to fix it? Well, we went in and with a router, we managed to take an 1/8 of an inch, a 1/16 of an inch, sorry, off the entire surface. Now remember, this was already done and finished even. Took a 1/16 of an inch off the entire surface, took a piece of 1/16 inch cherry veneer, ever so carefully cut this piece out. Remember, this is all when it's in place. Glued that piece back on, used that little piece to glue it back on, and we were able to hide it. If you look real close, you'll be able to see the joint line, and you have to look relatively closely. You can see the joint line right along there where that was added onto the front. But I'll call that a pretty good save. And yet another small project with a ton of work. So this was a remake of a shaker cabinet that I saw in a shaker book. Really liked it. Did it out of poplar, thinking I would go back and redo it out of something fancier if I liked it. So much work, I never bothered to do it again into something else. But there's a bunch of drawers. There's through wedge tenons. I think there's 36 through wedge tenons holding all the pieces together. Corners are all dovetailed. Had a lot of small children at the time. And what I had forgotten about was something, there's evidence of the small children, something to prevent the drawers from being pulled out and ending up on the floor. And it happened on a regular basis. So now I had to go back in again after the fact and figure this one out. So here's what I did. I'll set this on its back. Got to have access to all the drawers. So in taking the drawers out, I drilled a hole that went through this piece, this piece, this piece, and almost all the way through this piece. Obviously you didn't want to come out through the top. Same thing over here and same thing on this one. Now, let's open it up and show you how it works. So when you open your drawer, it's really simple. There's a little, actually you have to start at the top. Just a dowel with a washer on top, which is just enough to act as a little bit of weight. And the dowel drops down and acts as a stop so that the drawer can't come all the way out. One on each one. But the problem was, how do I deal with this one up here? So what I did in this one is I took a piece of dowel, I drilled the center out, and down from the top, I drilled a bigger hole, just partially down, to fit another washer. And I made it so that that little dowel would move within this dowel. Then I was able to glue that dowel in place. I put a little string on the bottom, which broke, and now that's why I can't get access to it anymore. But that little dowel inside the bigger dowel would drop down just enough to allow you to stop the drawer from falling out, yet at the same time you're able to push it in just enough. So it was enough clearance with that hole that I drilled, the larger diameter hole that drilled down from the top, that would allow the washer to move up and down and to allow that little dowel to move in and out and prevent the drawer from ending up on your lap. There was one here and one here, same thing over on this side. That was a good idea. Seasonal movement may have been what killed me on that, but at some point I'll probably take that apart and see if I can't redo it. So this mistake is relatively common. I'd like to say it doesn't happen to me anymore, but it still does occasionally. And that is gaps in your dovetails. Now these are called, or were apparently referred to as London dovetails, London style dovetails, where it was just literally the thickness of the saw blade. The problem with that is that any error is really noticeable because of the gap. It's so easy to judge the gap when it's narrow like that. Imagine if that was 1/8 of an inch wide and it was off a little bit, you wouldn't notice it. Anyway, so in order to fix the gap, You can see it right there. If you try to fix a gap, you always have to fix it from the end grain side. And by that I mean you need to put wood in this way so that the end grain shows on this side, and you need to put wood down in this way so that the end grain shows. If you try to fill with long grain, it'll always stand out. End grain stops right there instead of putting long grain that wouldn't normally stop right there. So let me show you what I mean. And by the way, if I did a row of dovetails like that today, I might fix one, but if I had more than one, I'd start over. So here's a dovetail, and there's a little bit of a gap right there. It just kind of looks a little bit messy. So here's how I would go in and fix that. The easiest way to do it is to make the gap uniform. So I grab my dovetail saw. Actually, yeah, I was going to say I could use my skinnier one, but I'll use this one. And the idea is to go in and make a saw cut that will go from here down to there, cutting right through the gap. Be careful not to go too far. I want that one to be stop right on that line, both up here and down here. Now, I've got a uniform gap instead of having to make a tapered wedge. So I would come in here. I might have planed that first. Come in here and slice a piece that's going to fill that gap just the way you want. Now we're going to fit that. And that's a little bit too thick, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to plane that. And you may think, how are you going to plane a little skinny piece of wood like that? Well, I take a piece of MDF with some sandpaper stuck to it. Put that on there, grab my block plane. And the sandpaper will hold it still so it doesn't move. In other words, there's no other way you could hold it. Very light pass. The blade's set up just right. I'll hold it right on here so I don't end up hitting my sole of my plane. Still too thick. I'll do the other side. Try to guess on the grain direction. Okay. Now what we want is end grain in both directions. So I'm going to trim this. This one is going to be seen here. So then I've got to cut this on a 45. That's going to be cut. So that piece would go in there like this. Obviously I didn't make it long enough and I just broke the corner off. But you would slide that one all the way over. And then the same repair would be done on the opposite side. Again, cut it at 45. Now this piece just broke on me, but you get the drift. and then slide that piece in. Obviously you want your miter up here in the top, but then you would end up with these two. There's not enough clearance there, so I come in and, well, that piece broke on me, but I'll turn it around and go this way. If you can get your miter to line up right on the top corner, now when you put a little bit of glue in there and clean it up, the end grain will hide a lot better up against another piece of end grain than if you try to put in a piece of long grain. And if you do that right, it'll disappear and you won't even notice it. So this one was the first one that I went and looked at. This we called the bloke box. It was named by a friend of mine in Australia. This is a man's jewelry box. Made out of black walnut. The drawer fronts are Claro walnut. So solid black walnut, but then a thin slice called veneer of Claro walnut that goes up and over. The problem was my secondary wood in this case, I chose very specific for this job, was sycamore, and I had very little of it. In fact, I only had enough for the two sides on each drawer and the back on each drawer. Well, when I do a drawer, the first thing you do is you take your back and you fit it precisely to the opening, and then you can use it as a template to carefully size your drawer front, which is usually pieces that have already been perfectly matched, so you can't risk screwing that up. Had I made a mistake on the back with a secondary wood, I could just make another one. I didn't even have that luxury this time because I had no more sycamore to work with. Well, this one went fine. Problem is when we film, there could be 4 or 5 days between sessions. So I had already fit the back, forgot about that, came in, took it over the shooting board and shot it a couple of times, and then I realized, oh shoot, this has already been done. So now I had a drawer back that was too small, too short, and I didn't have any more sycamore. So I got this idea. I took the piece of wood and I made a long cut called a scarf joint. I had a little bit of sycamore, just enough to fill in that spot, which allows you to spread these two pieces and lengthening this out, and it's as strong as solid wood when you're done. Doesn't look so great that way, but I was able to salvage it. And the problem is I could have got more sycamore, but our filming schedule was such that we need to have it right away. So that was number one. This is another one of those projects that for the size of it, it took up a tremendous amount of work. I think I worked on this for over a year. You know, I made it for my wife. I started doing it the 1st of November to give it to her for Christmas, and she got it the following Christmas, so that'll tell you. So when you're designing something from scratch, oftentimes there's going to be modifications. The first one was minor. These doors, I'll just show you real quick. So there's 8 drawers. Each drawer is a little bit different. And the drawers, after being dovetailed, had a flitch of bird's eye so that they all look identical. And when I made these doors, there was nothing here. It was just a great big open panel. It just didn't look right. So I was able to go in after the fact and add these, what we would call rails. I had to fit them in there, but it wasn't hard to do, and it made the whole thing look a whole lot better. But that was not the mistake I made. The mistake I made was, this is how you hold your necklaces, and this is turned on the lathe, the bird's eye maple, so you can take it out and access whichever one you want. The inside walls are all leather, just kind of softens the sound. But I intended to have places to hang necklaces on here. And then I realized that there just wasn't enough material to drill a hole. These are turned, these little knobs, and I turned a dowel on the end of them. And I was going to drill a hole and put it into here. But this material is less than 1/8 of an inch thick, and it's got leather in there. I said, that's not going to work. So what I did, I took a piece of ebony, 3 pieces, 3 on each side actually. I actually went in and I dovetailed it to a piece of walnut. So there's a dovetail in behind there. And then I cut it off. And I did that so that I could have good glue contact between the walnut and the inside walnut here. So that's the only thing that's holding it on, is that piece of walnut is glued to here, that piece of walnut is glued to here, the dovetail holds it together. Obviously there's nothing between the leather and the mahogany, or the ebony, but it gave me that enough material that I could actually drill a hole and put that little dowel, set it in there, and it holds up just perfectly. Same thing on both sides. This is a walnut tool cabinet that we did as a fundraiser for our Purple Heart project. But a couple of major mistakes on this one that we actually managed to salvage. I was really careful with the selection of the walnut. I had the pieces all laid out. Now when I say selection and pieces, this wing, I wanted these pieces to be the same. And what did I do? I ended up putting this piece was supposed to be in here, and that piece, which literally came out of the board right here, got screwed up. And just check your work. Anyway, that wasn't the big problem. The big problem was this. After cutting the boards, I didn't realize that I had made these panels too small, and there was a big gap in the middle. I said, oh, what am I going to do? This piece, the main section, had already been done. Well, I need the way in order to lock the doors. So what I did is I put a strip on here. So that closes. Put a strip on here, which is farther out. So when that closes, it prevents this one from opening. And then when you lock it, that snugs everything up. And your doors, one lock holds both doors securely. And the gap doesn't, it actually has a function now. So we were able to disguise that. Bottom drawers lock as well. It's all in the video. You get a chance to see it. Anyway, so don't get discouraged. You build something, especially if you're doing one-off stuff, meaning you've designed it and now you're building it. I always go through and like to do a model before I actually do, a mock-up before I do the real thing. But even then, things change. But there's always a way to solve the problem. Sometimes taking that problem and making it a feature, like what happened over here with the racing stripe on the bench, actually works in your favor. But there's always some way to fix it. Anyway, wood is good. Enjoy it. See you. If you like my work and enjoy my style of teaching, click on any one of these videos and help take your woodworking to the next level. I've always said, better tools make the job so much easier. If you click on the link below, the chisel and plane icon, it'll take you to our site and introduce you to all the tools that we actually manufacture right here in our shop. It'll also give you information on our online and in-person workshops.